everybody. Welcome. Several of our panelists are on the way. Jay Bosso is coming up right now, and it's Nathan from Blue Cats here. I actually haven't met Nathan, so hopefully he'll be joining us soon. Jay, how was the traffic? Speaking of mobility in smart cities. Great.
I was looking at my phone the entire time, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, my name is Chelsea Collier. I am the founder of DigiCity and the editor-at-large of Smart Cities Connect. Both of those are media platforms talking about smart cities. Two very different focuses. DigiCity focuses on technology policy and is really based in the US and is a result of my Eisenhower Fellowship in China, focused on smart cities. And Smart Cities Connect is a platform to help city managers and leaders really understand what's happening in the smart city space, and it's a safe space for them to talk about the challenges and the opportunities that are happening in smart cities, and also a media platform as well. So please check both of those out. Thank you so much for Enterprise IoT for hosting us in the summit today and for giving us the opportunity to talk about what I think is one of the most interesting intersections when it comes to smart cities is, we all can get a little distracted by the devices and the gadgets, but truly talking about the infrastructure, the platform on what makes smart cities run is incredibly critical. And I am incredibly grateful to have this panel of experts. Please join us. No, that's okay. So all the way towards the end, Zev Broud, I hope I pronounced that correctly, as the CEO and president of Green Road, a fleet safety software program which transforms driver behavior to reduce costs and optimize U.S. fleet operations. They are doing some incredibly innovative and interesting things, so interested to hear what you all are up to. Brian Jacob is the CTO and the co-founder of Data World, a way to discover and share data, connect with interesting people, and work together to solve problems faster. They are Austin-based company and very quickly becoming one of the darlings of smart cities worldwide. Jay Boisseau, Nathan Dunn with Blue Cats. He's the CEO. Blue Cats supports the connection and communication of devices, mostly focused on beacons from what I understand, in industries ranging from mining to healthcare to office space. A great example of how connected devices can offer real value. And Jay Boisseau is the president of Austin City Up and also CEO of Visius. Austin City Up is a smart city consortium and really ground zero for the city of Austin and connected communities around our smart city effort. So again, thank you so much for being here. And I'd like to just open it up, I did a very lightning round introduction, but any other opening thoughts that you'd like to add, and just kind of more about who you are and what you do, and your thoughts around infrastructure and smart cities. And Zev, we'll start with you.
So we have 250 million vehicles here in the US with a lifespan of 12 years. Just last year, about 70 million vehicles added to the roads. So those vehicles are here to stay for at least 10 to 20 years. So we need to assume that human-driven vehicles will be on the roads. A more disturbing fact is that last year was a record year in fatalities. In the US, 40,000 people died in accidents. 2015 was also a very bad year. About 35,000 people died in accidents. So I think the challenge for transportation is around saving lives eventually. So that's my comment for now.
Hello, I'm Brian. I'm the CTO of Data.World. We're a collaboration platform around data, a place for folks to bring data sets, publish them, make them open, also work in private on data sets and collaboration. We work with a lot of what we call data supply partners, which would be all the federal agencies that have open data mandates, but also a lot of the cities across the US. We work with chief data officers, folks who run the open data programs, from anyone who really has open data assets they want to get out into the world. A lot of our platform is based around the idea that there are 18 million open data sets available on the web, and the problem of finding those, figuring out if they're fit to purpose, actually cleaning them and assessing them and using them in a project or an application is a time-consuming process. We feel like everyone spends about 80% of their project just through that cleansing phase, and then the real value is added in that last mile. We really want to focus on shrinking the amount of time spent in that first mile, and most importantly, in the way we think we can shrink that time is by giving people a platform where they can actually share that cleaning work, share that alignment back. A lot of what we start to see happening with some of the civic groups using our platform is that you start to build de facto standards across a segment of data where there are no standards, or where there aren't well published standards, or where data doesn't tend to be published in a standard. You might have 311 data from 50 municipalities, but if that data doesn't use the same fields, doesn't have a similar schema, there's no real way to walk from one data set to the next. It's a lot harder for cities to use that to build real infrastructure on.
There we go. Sorry I was late too, by the way. My name's Nathan Dunn, CEO of Blue Cats. Blue Cats is effectively a BLE solution company, and we started in 2012, so we're one of the oldest beacon companies on the planet, and the good thing about that is that we get BLE probably as much as anyone, and we've got our main office here in Austin. We've also got an office in Sydney, Australia, where I'm from, and then we've got a presence in London. And we've also got quite an extensive engineering capability in Huntsville, Alabama. And so we started out, and we still provide a beacon solution of varying size hardware, depending on the use case. And more recently, we've seen the ability to extend our platform to a lot of sensing and a lot of IoT applications. And certainly what we'll get into today and what we're seeing is that the extensibility of a solution. We can provide a solution that can be used to engage consumers via their smartphones, but you can also use it to audit service levels for staff and operations, condition monitoring, and a whole range of things.
I'm Jay Boisseau. I'm the founder of Austin City Up, and we founded it with one very simple but incredibly grand vision in mind, which was to create a smart city. There are a lot of smart city projects. There are no true smart cities in which data from across many different domains and many different timescales is fully integrated into an analytics layer so that you can solve sort of macro problems. And so there's many great smart city example projects span in each of these different domains, in transportation, in safety, in sustainability, in energy usage, water utilization, and so on. What we hope to eventually do in Austin City Up is by bringing everybody together in one non-competitive, nonprofit consortium, provide an avenue for them to share information, communicate what they're doing, promote each other's efforts, and build collaborations. So we're non-competitive with any of our members. In fact, we try to augment all of our members. For example, tomorrow we have a workshop at Austin City Hall where about 15 different leaders from the city of Austin will present the top civic priorities in each of their areas. Then every member knows what are the 45, 50 top priorities spanning these departments, and how they can begin to think how they might begin to address them individually, but also what are some of the common themes across some of those. And we've seen some common themes in hosting these workshops in the past. We've learned some lessons from our first two attempts. We're really excited about tomorrow's workshop. And we believe that by providing that consortium that's at a city scale, so not a national scale or global scale, but if you're going to build a smart city, people need to actually talk at that city scale and figure out how to collect data, how to share data, how to use analytics on that data in effective ways from real-time and predictive to longer-term trends. Really, really proud to have, in fact, some of the members of this panel are in Austin City Up, and I see some of the people in the audience, their organizations are in Austin City Up as well. And so that's essentially what we're trying to do, is sort of help everybody's projects be more successful and bring them together to collaborate, to try some things that maybe they wouldn't have tried alone.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most exciting parts parts about the smart city space is because of these safe spaces that Austin City Up is providing. Private sector and public sector can come together to talk about the challenges and perhaps be a little more experimental than anybody would be able to do on their own. So obviously there's a large kind of focus here on data, which is incredibly important, but I think everybody brings a different perspective and experience. So related to infrastructure, what do you think is the single most important element from your perspective related to smart city infrastructure? I would knee-jerk and probably guess that your answer is data, but if you have any other perspectives on the infrastructure that helps you collect, store, manage, share that data, that'd be interesting. Jay, we'll start with you and then head down the panel.
Sure. Well, no real surprise what the answer is going to be, but it's not just in smart cities, right? There's all kinds of wonderful, cartoons and comics out there lampooning the state of data access and integration in science and research and business, et cetera. And it's just harder in smart cities because it spans so many domains that act as stovepipes often at the city scale, from transportation to health to education to economic development, public safety, et cetera. And so you've got so many sources even within those domains, then across those domains, different timescales of that data. So in fact, it makes the data problems I had while doing astrophysics research seem trivial in some ways. There's so many challenges. So actually, I'm really impressed by Data World, for example, and what they've bitten off the hardest infrastructure problem in this space, which is trying to organize all of this data and make it available to people who want to leverage multiple data sets. And so clearly, I think that's one of the toughest infrastructure things, but it's a challenge that we can absolutely address it. It's been a challenge in business and research and so on, but I'm really happy to see that in the smart city space, there are people stepping up to try to solve it at the grand level. How do we make data across these different domains and with different timescales and very different characteristics from structure to how it was collected and whatnot available so that there's at least a chance?
And Nathan, from a hardware perspective,
sure.
Your thoughts?
I think extensibility. So Jay made a good point. There are going to be common requirements across communities within a larger community, and there will also be very bespoke needs and requirements, either proactive or reactive. And I think it's important when you identify those common, the common features or the common deliverables, making a decision or an investment on infrastructure that is as extensible as possible, so that when those bespoke requirements present themselves, it's very simple to add that capability onto the infrastructure and the investment you've already made. Probably the biggest potential to stifle the proliferation of IoT across smart cities is having siloed infrastructure. Single investment, single infrastructure, single use. That's not really going to get anyone anywhere.
What's your experience been working with cities? Are there some who get it very quickly and you kind of hold those up as the champions, or is every single city different? What's that fabric like?
Certainly Austin City Up is unique in our experience. It's great to have someone as passionate as Jay looking to try and herd cats with a hose. And try and identify those common features, because that's really the low-hanging fruit that everyone's going to sign off on. My experience is we're doing a lot of very creative deployments in Australia, and that's probably more a function of the respective city councils being open to their private partnerships with the franchise operator for the tram network in Melbourne, for example. I'm not sure if anyone's been to Melbourne, but you cannot get around Melbourne without using a tram. And so there's a tangible operational use case that justifies our infrastructure across their network. And by default, they've created a very interesting and valuable network. Everything from vision impaired wayfinding applications. And so off the back of that, that's openness from the operator to say, we're investing in this technology, but we understand that the community can benefit in any number of ways.
So it's kind of starting with what you have and what the imperative is, and then layering on top of that.
Start with what's got budget and what moves the needle and cuts through the red tape. And it's a fine line between scaring some of these organisations off about thinking it's going to be a free-for-all, but you need to plant the seed of just keep in mind that you're creating value for other people, and you may not know how they will use it, but the possibilities there.
And Brian, I know y'all are just getting started, but how does that compare to kind of your experience in terms of getting started with what you have, and what are some of the impediments that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, as Nathan said, I mean, the siloed data that's not really designed for interoperability is one of the biggest problems. And as Jay was saying, the current state of how data is managed, how data is distributed, is pretty sad. It's a very difficult. It's not standardized. The way I would best answer it, if I think forward to the future, I don't know how distant, but the thing I think I'd want to see, I think that we will see, is everyone who's publishing these publishing these data assets out of cities, out of government, out of academics, are publishing into one big interoperable knowledge base with standard schemas and standard taxonomies for talking about things. And that sounds like a really distant future vision, but actually, that's already been invented, and there have been people who have been, the technology exists. We've been talking about this for 15 years. It's called the semantic web. It's called, if you're familiar with linked data, linked open data, semantic web, all of those concepts are basically the idea that just like you publish, you wouldn't dream of publishing human readable content in any other way other than as HTML pages accessible over HTTP with interlinks between them, so everyone can use them via standard software called a browser, and you can just walk the internet and follow the links and understand what's out there. Data can operate the same way. Individual data points can become addressable elements that are queryable, and so a lot of what we're trying to do is start from the far opposite end of the spectrum. Let's go to the way people are dealing with data today. That's just not the reality today. People are publishing non-standardized CSVs, Excel spreadsheets. People who are collaborating on data are doing this via email and maybe shared network drives. They're not. What we're trying to do is basically give folks a platform where they can iteratively work on data in place, build semantic linkable data. We're not there's no magic bullet, right? We're not automatically saying we know it's in your data, but what we're doing is getting it into a format where it's in one knowledge base. It can be linked, and as people are working with data, when you go grab a CSV from over here and an Excel spreadsheet from here and a database query here, and figure out that you can use that data together, that's knowledge. And that is, you just did a 1 unit of knowledge engineering. The problem is right now today, that gets done in a silo, in a vacuum for one application and thrown away, and no one else benefits from that work. So the same exact unit of work gets done 50 times or 50,000 times. That's where I see. I think that's going to be one of the most important enablers, because if the data's already got knowledge about how it can be used embedded within it, then all of the applications you build on top of it become just that much easier to build. You're not spending your time figuring out how to fit the Legos together. They're already Legos. They already connect.
Perfect. And Zev is a company that collects and shares data. Is this music to your ears that this future is unraveling, or what are your thoughts?
Well, I absolutely agree on the silo approach, and I just want to look at it from a bit different angle. I think, IoT is promising very exciting new technologies. In principle, every stop sign will have the ability to send so much rich data, but back to the silo approach, but what is the common problem we're trying to solve? I think this is the real question, because if we could say this is the challenge, then the silo approach would actually be able to look at it from a different perspective, because today we're looking at technologies, we're looking at infrastructure, but in my opinion, the problem we need to focus in is the driver. In the next few years, and we already see it now, our digital life is impacting the way we're driving. When we're driving today, we're distracted. Distracted driving becomes a key issue. And going back to my earlier comment, fatalities, distracted driving is becoming a major portion of that. If you look at some of the statistics that NHTSA are saying, 94% of the accidents are because of driver errors. About 70 to 80% of them are because of decision errors or recognition errors. If the future IoT could help the driver lower that and regain their anticipation to road conditions, then these are the right infrastructures. I think that the cities the smart cities need to develop. And every time that you're looking at new technology, you say, can that really help me solve my number of problems? Vision Zero, is a big initiative now in all the smart cities. And if we want to really achieve that, then obviously the silo approach on data needs to contribute to, let's focus, how do we get to that point? But also when we're looking at infrastructure, what type of infrastructure we're going to put in to support that. So that's, when we're looking at where we want to go, I think this is where the focus should be.
Any thoughts or comments or reactions to that?
Agree.
Say. I mean, it's ultimately a smart city's best iteration is being in service of its citizens and residents. So data and how it's collected, how it's shared, how it's organized, how it's framed is a function of that in a great world. So, so let's pretend that everybody in the audience is the city manager from a different city. What advice do you have for leaders in the city who are working in city governments, who are trying to really make some headway in some of their city's biggest challenges? And Zev, we'll just start with you, and then Jay will come back to you.
All right, so I'm going to go back to data. I think data-driven decisions is the key. You have today so many initiatives, you have so many great ideas, and many people who really would like to contribute, but at the end you need to take decisions, as we all here do in our business, is data-driven decisions. And the question really is, who owns the data? Because if you look at where the market is going today, the OEMs want to own data on the vehicles. We all, as businesses, want to make money from the data. But there is some data that needs to be shared with the community, some data that can be commercial. So I think that is one thing that, cities and maybe federal, or I don't know, there are many people who are involved in that, but there's something that, what is shared, what can help save life, and is that something that we share? And if we share that, that's great, because then cities can take decisions that are based on data that they have. And I think, if there is something that, back to your question, decisions based on real facts and data that they can act on.
I think the ownership piece of it is really interesting, and Brian, you all are basically kind of democratizing that process, if I understand it correctly. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean,
who owns it at the end of the day, and in a perfect world, how should that work?
Yeah, I think, it's something we think about a lot. We're obviously big proponents of open data, but, from the beginning, we made having private data, being able to collaborate in private, a key part of it, because even open data has privacy as part of its life cycle, right? Like, no researcher is going to start developing their research data set in the open. They're going to develop it, they're going to refine it, they're going to publish, and then they're going to want to cite that data out in the open. Public data has to go through some amount of scrutiny and internal review before it's suitable, because there's a lot of so private data is definitely a part of the ecosystem. I think. What I think we see happening is something like the open source software movement starting to happen around data. If you flash back 20, 30 years, most corporations wouldn't dream of using software that was developed outside of their four walls. Now you'd be hard pressed to find a technology company that isn't really significantly based on open source with, and again, there's still reason to have private IP, there's still reason to have private software. That's your competitive advantage, but for commoditized things, it makes sense, and playing to incentives, that's, it's great to open up those resources to save lives and to make the world a better place, and people want to do it for that reason, but if there's not also an economic reason, companies aren't going to do it. And,
by the way,
and they're,
40,000 people is $300 billion.
I mean,
just that we understand the numbers.
But even dialing it, even.
The question is out of whose pocket? I mean, saying the numbers that way doesn't have any meaning because it's out of whose pocket.
So back to the ownership piece of it, and where it all kind of rolls back down.
But even dialing it back to direct economic incentives from organizations, from companies, there is a huge value in having open community curated data assets where look, a lot of the decisions that companies are making are based on the exact same open raw data sources as 500 other companies, thousands of other companies. There's no reason for each of those companies to be pulling those in and independently curating them and making sense of them. And similarly, the data that companies are the companies that cities are producing, it makes sense to get that out into the world and curate it into a format where it's interoperable, so that becomes a shared public good. And then the differentiation comes into how do you apply analytics on top of that? How do you do the real work of building actionable insights on top of that data?
And look, I think continuing that open theme, I think collaboration is critical to a lot of cities actually jumping in and starting, because as we all know, the capability exists. It's just someone cutting through, whether it's politics or just inertia. And I mean the contrast between potentially two neighbouring city councils. One may have no idea what they want to do with the technology, so therefore we're not going to use it. Now that's in a way it's not an excuse. It's sure measure twice and cut once in terms of we want openness, but we want security. We want to control it because we don't really know how this is going to play out. But there is a way to do that, and if you're open about having that ambition as a city, there's enough smart people in most cities that they'll come back and tell you the way you should be using it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I'd like to keep on that theme. Jay, I'll share my microphone.
Oh, sure. So, yes, if I had one bit of advice for city managers, it would be, realize that there's going to take some investment here. There's going to have to be some funding applied to providing the data and some data hosting infrastructure to stimulate some of these companies to make it possible for them to do things for you. Cities don't have, we all know cities don't have infinite budgets. It's not like a company that can at least have a business plan where they double the number of sales next year and they have double the revenue and double the profit next year. Cities are constrained by tax bases. And so to first order, their funding is the same year to year to first order, and their funding allocation is roughly the same each year. They still have to provide a police force. They still have to provide emergency medical services. They still have to provide a fire department. And so with them, it really has to be an optimization. We're not going to have twice the revenue next year, so how are we going to use the revenue we've got even better? And there's no company that doesn't think using data and analytics on that data to improve the state of their business isn't a good idea. All companies do this routinely. Cities just have it harder because they have less discretionary funds. And the only time they really have a significant amount is when we have a bond election like Austin had a few months ago. We had a $720 million bond election because that wasn't discretionary money. That didn't exist in the city of Austin budget. So there was a bond election for something major. But for the sort of the mid-scale things, the 7-8-figure things, even the 6-figure things, it's very difficult for cities to fund these unless they plan smart infrastructure in and unless they plan very intelligently for how to maximize the return on that. And that's one of the things cities can do, and the city of Austin, I think, is looking to do, is how can it provide data in a way that companies can go build business models around that. They're incentivized to access that data and do great things with that data that help the city overall, and the city had a relatively modest investment in collecting and making that data available. And I'm with Brian. Not all data should be open. I don't believe that. Not all source code should be open, and people shouldn't shouldn't feel like they have to give away their art or their inventions or anything. There's business models around all of this, but for cities in particular, it makes sense with limited budgets and limited flexibility in budgets to collect as much data as possible, make that data as open as possible, and then to work with nonprofits, for-profits, university researchers, et cetera, to say, hey, we're making this data available. Can you help us solve these problems? And we're completely supportive of you going out and making a lot of money or publishing a lot of papers or doing whatever you do around that. We're going to try to provide the data that helps you help us as well as help yourself.
And just everything Jay said, 100%, and bias toward just getting the data out there. Like, don't all of my talk earlier about I want us to be putting it to a knowledge base where everything makes sense. That's all true, and I think that's inevitably the path that we're going on. The first step is the raw material, the unprocessed crude oil of just you have information in data that is unique in the world, that no one else has that information, and if you get it out there, it will get curated and it will find its applications, and people will find ways of using it. There's incredible desire to use the data.
Well, I love where this conversation is going because it sounds like the two things that are paramount in a quote-unquote ideal world are, number one, flexibility from both the public sector and the private sector side, and standardization. So it's interesting that those two things in this particular case are operating together, and I think it's a great point of being very consistent in those standards and at the same time incentivizing private sector companies and entrepreneurs and people who are running private sector companies and doing really great things for each individual community and society overall at the same time. So are there cities who are really leading in this space? Are there cities that we can point to that are really kind of setting the bar and setting the standard?
Sure. So again, as Mark Dow, the Deputy Secretary for Transportation, said at South by last year, there really are no smart cities, but there are many cities with smart projects trying to put them together. Some of the leading cities in terms of that in the U.S. appear to be cities like Chicago, which Brenna Berman is a really visionary CTO for the city. Not all cities have a CTO. She's a particularly visionary one, and she wants to support a variety of different projects and see where these, and it's not always financial support, but where these may play out. And one interesting one, and I know that I've known the PI for it for a long time, is the Array of Things project. And so they're going to deploy these massive sensor boxes on various light poles around the city, and they had to get city cooperation to do that. And they'll collect and make available a lot of data and a lot of analytics on that data, which you'd be surprised how even police department deployment is sometimes it can be allocated based on analyses that they see in weather patterns and traffic patterns and whatnot. So as they've poured through this data, they found that they can actually, in ways that are not necessarily directly relevant to weather data or traffic data or other data that it is collecting, they actually see the ramifications of some of the patterns that emerge out of this. So I'd say Chicago's up there. Washington, D.C. is certainly up there in the U.S. Internationally, there's some examples like Singapore and Copenhagen. So there are some cities that are really investing in this smart city infrastructure. It's my colleagues that are in global companies like Hitachi and IBM, they say overall the U.S. is a little bit behind, though. Some European cities and some Asian cities appear to be investing more heavily in smart infrastructure.
Yeah, look, to reiterate what I said before, my experience in terms of what makes a progressive city is a city that's happy to get out of its own way, but doing it the right way. And certainly we've dealt with both. Melbourne is one example of a city that is more than happy for infrastructure to be deployed, funded by someone else. They're always going to sign off on that. But they get that there's an opportunity there. And so it's let someone else scratch their own itch, and they're accidentally deploying a network, and they know that they'll have access to it.
A couple cities that I think are doing a really standout job at reaching out to interested citizens who are interested in taking data and doing interesting civic works with it are Boston and San Diego. And Austin is actually really kind of is really doing an increasingly better job at that as well. So those are I think Austin, Boston, and San Diego are the three cities we work the closest with on that. They do a great job of fostering local data hackathons, getting the Open Austin group here in Austin is really kind of well supported by the city, and they've done some pretty interesting projects.
One city is London, obviously. TfL, the Transport for London, is very active. They're looking at how traffic is shaping up. You have a shared economy that is changing the way we are using vehicles, and I think London is officially 24 hours traffic jam. So they have some serious issue around who's coming into the city, and pollution is a big issue for cities. So definitely things are happening, and they have a data where you can actually get data from and share data with the city.
Can I add one thing? So you asked at the city scale, and I instantly thought of city governments, but I see sitting in the front row Joe Ianello, and I want to give props to Cat Metro because they publish the data for their bus feed so that hackers can come up with apps to tell you things about where the buses are going to be at any time. And Joe is piloting a project with these smart kiosks that a few cities in the U.S. are trying, and those smart kiosks have potential to collect data as well as push information out to the public as well. So it's not always the city government that's doing it. That's something that's happening from a non-governmental organization, but in our city.
So I wish that we had another 30 minutes. So maybe we should do another panel exactly like this where we have an hour to go into all the different areas because I think this is a fantastic discussion. Just want to thank each of you for sharing your time and your energy and your expertise. You know, we've talked about really kind of one layer when it comes to infrastructure focused on data just because of the expertise on the panel. I think there's kind of 4 different layers of infrastructure when it comes to smart cities. There's the hardware layer, the things that are collecting data, the management layer, what we're talking about, big data, and then the actual physical infrastructure. You know, this is the high-speed internet, mobile, small cells, what we know now is 4G, coming 5G. So certainly a lot more to talk about, but I just really appreciate all the insights that you've given us on the management layer, specifically around data and how we can create smarter, more connected cities. So thank you, and thanks everybody.
Thank you.